Good day, everybody. Let us now discuss lesson 4 of unit 8, the basic elements of the communication process. So in this lesson, we are going to understand what are the elements of communication process, the basic elements of communication process, and how does these elements in the communication process help us understand better the whole process of communication in general. Kumbaga, ato karong isa-isahon, how we are going to identify what are these basic elements and how should we be able to use these basic elements in the communication process to make it effective and to make it comprehensive as much as possible. So make sure that you have with you your pens and notebooks to jot down salient points of these basic elements of the communication process and questions that will arise during the course of our discussion. Now, if we are both ready, then let us try to start with our lesson. Here's a general concept that I would like you to ponder. Miscommunication occurs when something goes wrong in one or more elements in the communication process. Take note that in every process, there needs to be a step-by-step procedure that we must adhere to. Similarly, the standards needs to be met and the standards needs to be maintained as much as possible most of the time. Now, if not, then miscommunication will definitely occur. Similar to that, in the process of communication, we need to understand what are the different elements present in that communication or in the communication process in order for us to be able to understand what should be dealt with in terms of the different scenarios that we are going to establish communication and the process of communication, the different scenarios, the different people that we are going to talk to, and the different messages that we will be conveying. So by knowing the basic elements in the communication process, we will be able to understand how to utilize them best given the variety of the circumstances, the people, and the messages that will be involved, hence avoiding miscommunication. Now, with that being said, our main objectives for this lesson are the following. Identify the elements of the communication process, understand how these elements are applied in the communication process, and evaluate one's own communication skills using the communication process. So not only are we going to identify the elements of the communication process, as well as to understand kung unsaon pag-apply ning mga elements in the communication process, but hopefully we can also assess and evaluate our own communication skills by knowing the communication process. Asa nata taman, asa na ang atong kahibaluan taman, to what extent do we know and to what extent do we need to improve and do we need to be more informed when we talk about the communication process. Remember that we are going to look into ourselves, kumbaga manamin ta ba, how well versed we are with the different basic elements of the communication process that will help us later on become effective and critical communicators. Now, with that being said, let's now try to unlock the different concepts behind this lesson by distinguishing the possible answer to a very essential question as we start our lesson. How can an understanding of the basic elements of the communication process help people communicate effectively? There's also another question that stems from this. What is effective communication, right? So if we are going to narrow it down, basically we go back to the basic elements of the communication process and link it, integrate it to identifying effective communication in the different setting, in the different scenarios, whether be it objective or subjective, what for us now is effective communication. Now as we begin, let's now try to unlock the basic elements of communication process. Let's begin with the basic concept that we are going to talk about all throughout this discussion, which is communication. We've already discussed previously that communication is a two-way process and it is a system of transferring information or ideas. Now, basic elements of communication include the sender or the source, the message, encoding, communication channel, decoding, receiver, feedback, and noise. I'm not saying that the communication process flows through these basic elements accordingly. Posible gyud nga na ay malahi diha, but ultimately, it must begin with this process. There is a sender or the source of the message, the source of the communication process. Now with that, naa siya message nga gipada. Karon ang iyang message nga gipada, kailangan nato i-encode using the different communication channel that we have. After doing so, we are going to decode the message, and this will be done now by the receiver. If this process is already done effectively, then the receiver can now provide a feedback. Ultimately, as we talk about noise in general, it may or may not be applicable depending on the scenario where the communication process has developed. So that's also something that we need to ponder. Naman nagyun na siya step-by-step process, dili pwede nga, wa pa kay giingon, nagulat na ka og response or nagulat na kang feedback. There should always be the source and the message clearly stated in order for it to be encoded into different communication channels or mediums to be decoded by the receiver. This is evident in our class policies. If you can remember, class, and if you can observe, I told you that these are my policies in our online and modular classes or blended learning, kumbaga. At the start of the meetings that we've had, I've already given to you what I want us to achieve together. Me as the instructor and you as the students, right? So with that, I also gave you the freedom to negotiate and to talk to me, converse to me about the things that you find difficult to meet, the standards that you find difficult to meet, and the different issues or questions or whatever it is that you would like to be addressed. So now there is the process. If we break it down, I am the source or the sender of the particular message, which in this case is the class policies, the class protocols, as well as the point given, the extent of your freedom to negotiate and to communicate with me. That's the message. I encoded it through the different mediums that we were able to communicate with, whether it was our Google meetings, whether it was in the group chats and classes in Quipper, or our group chats in Messenger or other platforms, right? Now after that, the way you decoded it, the way you interpreted those messages, the way you have understood those messages is a very big factor in order for you, the receiver, to give me a feedback, to let me understand, let me know if you understood the instructions and the intentions that I have given you, right? Now, if not, then ultimately, that becomes noisy. Samok ragid ka na siya para sa inyo, ha? But if that communication process was established and maintained effectively as what we are trying to do, then ultimately, the feedback is going to be resounding. So, what does, given in that scenario, sir, what is the feedback now that you get from us, the receiver or your students? Simple. Your compliance to the different tasks that is given or assigned in Quipper, on our summative assessments, and on the different activities, group works that I ask you to do or that I require you to do. Kana lang. So, sir, does it mean that since there is a resounding feedback that you get, no, makita nimo sa Quipper nga naay nag-answer, kompleto ang mga tasks nga gi-answeran, there is enough time for them to communicate nga, sir, wala na mo na-answeran kay hinay ang internet connection, or sir, pwede mag-modular na lang yun ko plainly. Yes, I believe that the medium is effective in that regard because you get the way I want you to communicate with me. Nga, you need to tell me what works best for you, whether it's complying with the activities or the exercises assigned in Quipper, or best to do it in a modular manner. Whether you are able to meet the deadline or there are buzzer beaters that are quite difficult, nga di gyud ninyo maabtan that you need extension and you communicate that need for an extension to me. That could be, now sir, is it effective? Given the majority, if not all, in every section that has participated effectively in my activities and in my lessons, I would say yes, it is effective. It is, do we need or do I set for that particular standard? I say no, because there are still students that have not yet joined classes, that have not yet answered and complied with the lessons, activities, and exercises, and even summative assessments that I have given. Now, what do I need to do? It's either there is now another communication process between me and your advisors, or me and, to the students that are non-compliant. Okay? So that is the different, or that is communication process put into context. Now, isa-isahin natin. Let's go one by one and discuss what are these basic elements of the communication process. First, we have the sender or the originator. When we say sender, class, that is where the information comes from. Sir, does that also mean that information should always come from a person of origin or the point of origin? Yes. Just like what we have been talking about, the sender is the one who gives the message, where the message comes from and originates from, or where the information originates from. Without the sender, then ultimately, the communication process is either not established in the first place or is established but does not lead to any progressive feedback. Kumbaga, samok lagi ang padulngan. That's what most conflicts, stem from. That's where most conflicts stem from. There is no accurate source or sender kung asa nag-originate. Mao na class nga natay gina-coin sa term nga fake news. Because if you're going to look for the source of that information, it is not available. Meaning to say, there is now a question on your credibility. So the sender should also understand his or her role in bringing forth that information into the communication process. Because if the sender is not knowledgeable or is not taking accountability, responsibility, or not being kanang coined ba, cited kung kinsay sender, then there is a big question on whether or not the information is credible, made up, or something used as a propaganda. Now, when talking about the sender, we also need to take note of the second element of the communication process, the message. Of course, the communication process would not become useful if there is no clear message. Dili man ta kasagaran maungot. Yes, we already identified that there is a sender and a receiver, kay two-way process lagi siya. But then again, what do we communicate? In the beginning, what do we communicate? Messages, class, are verbal or non-verbal. That's pretty clear by now, given the advent of technology has given us a lot of creative ways to come up with the messages that we would like to communicate, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. Even in the basic karabitaw conversations in group chats or chat, makahibaw na ka o kung unsa ang mga messages nga ginahatag sa mo, whether it's verbal or non-verbal. For example, nakay-kaaway, taas kayo kagisend sa yahan, that you're so like this, ganyan, mataray, matapang, libakera, so on and so forth. Replyan lang kag emoji nga like. So you already get the message. That's non-verbal. Kasi, binabasa lang natin or sendan kag voice recording. Magyaw-yaw siya dito for 5 minutes. That's verbal. Pero kung ang i-reply sa mo is like lang, then you already get the message. It's either you stop what you're doing, stop ka nang confronting the person, or sige, padayon diya kay you will be wasting your time. So again, the message is very important, especially now that the advent of technology is already at its peak or, evolving. I don't believe that there is really a peak of technology because it is constantly evolving. Anyway, message is also the idea or the information that the receiver must know. So, it is a very important concept that we must understand that the message should be relevant and should be useful to the receiver. But nowadays, useful and relevant messages are like a thing of the past, wherein kung dili gani ka makarelate sa maong message, well, ultimately, there is no interest. But if you are very much interested and into, the topic or the concept that you're talking about, then you will be really showing a lot of interest to the message that is being communicated. So then again, message could be verbal or non-verbal, and it is the idea or the information that the receiver must know. Now, in talking about the message, there is the encoding. The encoding class is presenting the idea or information using symbols or characters, right? This also means the creation of meaning for the receiver. So, if the sender, knowing what the message is, encodes it or presents the idea or information using symbols or characters creatively or efficiently, comprehensively, then the creation of meaning of the receiver will become smooth. Pero kung dili po gani klaro ang message nga gi-encode, then it will become very confusing. Muna nga, it is very important that on very important documents, a lot of information and idea is presented in a very detailed manner. I am one of those as well. Perhaps you can relate with me when I say that. I am one of those people that gets annoyed why forms in offices, government offices or private institutions have the same format in, application for whatever it is. Mangayo ka og transcript of record, mangayo ka og the same process ang pangayon sa mo. You fill out a form and the form is balik-balik. Your name, balik-balik pag lahi pag family name, first name, middle name, so on and so forth. Because class, that is now the encoding of the message. I know that you're also, sir, kada na lang yun magpa-enroll, sir, balik-balik, ka. Diri naman ta ko nag-eskwela. Gikan senior high school, padulog, or gikan elementary, padulog high school. Why is it so? So on and so forth. Mainit ang ulo. Because class, we need to understand that in order for the communication process to become effective and comprehensive, we need to encode information in a manner that is understandable, that should create meaning for and to the receiver. So kung dili ka mo present sa imuhang idea or information comprehensively or effectively, then there is a question as to how the receiver will get the message, as to how the receiver will interpret the message. Muna nga, if we are studying research now is definitely a lot of quote-unquote bardagulan of information. You have citations from different studies. You also have your own take or your own interpretation as to the relevance of your study, as to how you interpret the particular term in that study, the scope of your study, so on and so forth. Matinga ka, nganong kailangan detalyado jud kayo ning research. Similar to these important documents, why do we need to have a detailed presentation of our idea or information? Take note, class, that it is, or research in this context, presents us with new information or a development of a certain phenomena or an existing study. Right? Now, if we are unable to present the idea comprehensively, then there is a question whether or not the receiver or those who will be reading your study will come up with the meaning that you would like to convey. That's why it needs to be presented in a manner nga dali ra pod masabtan sa magbasa. Mabitaw, if you go back to my previous example of my class protocols, I always tell you that if you're going to message me privately or i-PM ko ninyo, I always ask you to give me your full name and your kanang grade and section. Given that klaro sa inyo ha, nganong kada ang akong gusto nga pag-present ninyo sa idea or sa information. Because as I've said, you are 8, 9 sections and I cannot memorize everybody's names. Nya magamit pag yun kag icon nga Chinese imongan sa imong Facebook. So unsaon ako pagkaila nga you are so and so from this section and grade level. So when you are going to message me, you need to state your complete name, your grade and section. Kaya para makahibaw ko nga ikaw di ay si Juan de la Cruz from grade 11, Humes 3, so on and so forth. You know, so there is now a clear presentation of your idea nga imong concern gi-raise or imong information gi-send sa ako is with regards to this matter. Because if the receiver cannot create meaning out of the encoded information, then there will be a relapse of the communication process. There will be a failure to meet effective communication. I hope you get that point across. Another is the communication channel. When we talk about communication channel, this is the pathway of the message from the source or the sender to the receiver. So naghisgot na tag sender, asa gikan originator, asa gikan ang information or where the information comes from. We've also talked about the message. Kung diin, mauni ang ginapasa or gina-convey ngadto sa receiver. And we've also tackled about encoding, presenting your idea or information that should create the meaning that you would like to be understood by the receiver. Now, here's another question, or here's another element of communication process. The communication channel in which muagi ang imuhang mensahe. Muagi ang unsay gusto nimong ipaabot sa receiver. Again, the pathway of the message. Now, in this regard, nowadays, we have a lot of communication channels available. We can do it print. We can also do it digital. Kung print, naabot pa ninyo tong panahon sa atong mga lola and lolo nga magsuwat sila, they write letters and send it via the mailing services of the post office or wherever it may be. Then you write it on a paper and then you put it you seal it in a envelope and then you give it to whoever receiver you have in mind. Kung kaabot pa mo ana. But if wala na, you are born and immersed on the digital age, then you are given now the idea that isang chat nyo lang. Diba? Isang chat lang natin. Pwede na yun mo mag-communicate ang tao. However, class, let's understand that there are levels of, levels as to the manner that you communicate to a person. If you're communicating, let's say, to an official of the school, your teacher, your advisor, or an official in the community, your barangay kagawad, your barangay captain, your city or municipal mayor, the governor of the province, so on and so forth, there needs to be a certain level of formality to which your letter or your message should be conveyed. Di pwede nga i-chat lang nimog kalit ang governor or i-chat lang nimog kalit inyong kapitan. If you're really that casual, then the message can be communicated through that channel. But if we are looking for the formal way, then we must understand that there should be a manner or a certain level of formality that needs to be observed. Dan na, gila yung ay hilasa gid aning Sir Darren magpa-message siya complete name and section. No, actually, that is the communication channel that is presented in order for us to establish effective communication. Because if not, if we don't adhere to these standards, ultimately, we are like sitting ducks in the middle of the rain. Way kahimuan. Kay di man nimo ma-establish ang proseso sa communication. Sir, hagua day ani sir no kung butunaw naon. Actually, if you ask me, this becomes now easy, especially when we practice it in most of the occasions that we can. Let's say that if you communicate well, if you communicate, properly by observing the level of formalities that needs to be observed when you are talking to the school principal, your advisor, your teacher, then madara gid ninyo ni siya masiasa mo moadto. Ug naanad ka maghimo kag formal letter If you're a member of the student council or class officer or whatever, or the club or the organizations that you belong to, maanad kag himog formal letter, you are educated and you are immersed into doing and making formal letters, this will become second nature. The communication channel now needs to be clear as to what pathway the message is going to be using, is going to go through. If casual lang kaayo, then you can always message it. Pero if there is a need for a certain level of formality to be observed, then we also need to understand what should be used. Communication channels nowadays are very vast. Daghan kaayo. Of course, there is the traditional way, which is the print. Ipadani mo ang suwat. What are examples of this? Kanang ang papel lang gyapon na basihan. Bills. Water bill, electric bill, PLDT bill, Globe prepaid, postpaid bill, ana. Whatever bill it is, gipadagyo na nila using sulat. Nga naman, there is a need for transparency. Nga nakadawat ka sa maong resibo, sa maong bill, nga nakadawat ka sa maong letter, mo ganin kung mag-letter ka, there should always be two copies. The copy of the receiver and your copy as a received copy nga nadawat yun na sa maong hingtungdan. That should be, or that is the ideal way of doing it. But if not, then, well, there is now a question of transparency. Kay people can always say, wa na ko nadawat. They can always say no. Unya, napirmahan day nila. So at least, naakay pang hawakan nga nadawat yun na nila. Right? So that should be the case. Mo bitaw, if you observe, this is the same through kaning mga delivery riders, Shopee, JNT, whatever it is nga magahatod sa inyo ha. Picturean mo nila as proof that you were able to receive the package or to receive the letter to which ngayong gihatag ana nga opisina. There is also the digital way or the email, electronic mail. Pwede ninyo na i-send via email, whatever platform is available. Gmail, Yahoo Mail, I don't know if Yahoo Mail is still available. Gmail is the most used application nowadays. Google it or Messenger it. Whatever social media platforms is most common. Pero ang pinakasikat yun in the Philippines, I believe, is Facebook. Messenger, of course, it is connected to Facebook. No? Instagram, Twitter. Mo siguro na ang ginagamit yun. And YouTube. Mo siguro na ang ginagamit yun as a primary means of communication channels here in our country, in our locality. Mo na nga, they get so rich because they have a lot of advertisements nga ginaere. Kaya mo lagi ang communication channel in the modern day. You have YouTube, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, pero ang mas gina engage sa tao is ang Facebook o ang og ang YouTube. Mo na makita ninyo ning mga candidates for the elections, daghan kay silang political ads on Facebook and on YouTube. Napod sa TV, right? They air it on mass media or broadcasting networks. There is also another communication channel that is commonly seen nowadays that it is the campaign period here in our country. Kaning rekorida. This is old but gold. Effective, really effective rekorida to inform people nga aduna di ay maong patabo, aduna di ay maong panghitabo or aduna di ay maong kandidato nga nidagan. Muna nga kung kandidato ka nga nagsalig lang ka sa imuhang Facebook or online ads, ultimately your reach will be very limited. Okay, how about those places nga hinay ang internet connection? Dili ka open sa Facebook or kung ka open man sa Facebook, very limited ang makita. So, rekorida is very important. Pero dili pod maayo nga alas 5 pa lang sa kadlaw, nagrekorida na ang maong tabaghak. That is so unfair sa mga nangatug pa. Sa maong mga nanginang naginot pagtug kay buo ang adlaw, on that particular day. But then again, going back, rekorida is also one of the examples of the communication channel, right, that is being utilized. For example, advertisements of a new clinic in your area or in Digo City. Na nag-open bag-o nga veterinary clinic, na nag-open nga bag-o nga dental clinic, eye clinic, whatever it is, ilang ginapa tuyok sa rekorida or sa radyo. Those are different communication channels. Pero we highlight the most common, which is print and online or digital, because mao ra man gyud na siya. It all falls into that category. TV, radio, recorrida, that is all considered as digital and print. Right? So those are communication, or that is communication channel. So we have different types of communication channel. We have the auditory, olfactory, visual, tactile, and electronic. So these are only some of the few types or few of the many types of communication channels available. Next is the receiver. The receiver is the one who receives the message from the word itself, no? And the receiver creates meaning out of the encoded message of the sender. Take note that it is creating meaning out of, there is always a highlight on the encoded message of the sender. If you try to look at that statement, it already encapsulates the basic elements of the communication process. There is the sender, the message, the encoding, and the creating of meaning. Of course, it is given that there is also now the inclusion of the communication channel. Let me give you an example. You are texting or you are, sending a message through chat. Tapos, you come across as a serious person. Now, in your chat, ultimately, or most of the time, people will perceive it as stricto. Or people will perceive it as too serious. Even if you are light ang tone, light ang manner, nag-joke around ka sa imuhang message, pero kay seryoso lagi ka nga tao, then people will perceive it as serious. So there is also a need for you to clearly state, what your message is all about, because the meaning that is going to be created by the receiver is not controlled anymore by the sender. Mao na nga importante that the message that we encode is detailed, specific, and should give or should let the receiver create the meaning that you wanted to communicate in the first place. Mo bitaw mapansin ninyo that in my messages, my announcements, I always leave a smiling emoji so as to tell you nga wa ko nasuko. Nag-remind lang ko, it may come across nga mura kog nangasaba pero wa ko nasuko. Kaya basig ma-intimidate na noon ang tao mo communicates kuha. Ma-intimidate na noon inyong classmate mo message sa kuha nga wala dahil sila kapasa ato nga requirement niya nagpasa na og grado. No, I hope you get the point na sometimes, though that you are clearly stating your intention in a manner that is really innocent, wa ka na suko, wa ka na ngaway, pero people will perceive it. The meaning that they will create out of it is something nga mura bitaw kag, bakit parang kasalanan ko? Bakit parang galit na galit ka? Gusto mong manakit? Right? Pero inana ang ma-create nga meaning sa ilahang utok. But then again, what you are trying to communicate is different. What you're trying to communicate is, kumbaga, opposite to what they created or what the meaning that they have created. Here's an example. I know a politician that he did won in the 2016 election. Karon, one of the issues that was thrown at him or at this particular politician was that the politician was too serious. Unya, dili kakaingon nga he is very serious by talking to him or her. Nakaingon lang sila nga this politician is serious because mugot og dagway ang maong politiko. And I can relate kay mugot og dagway. If you see me sitting in a corner waiting for someone doing nothing, you will really perceive that I am angry or I am snobbish because I have a particular kanabitang facial feature nga wa ko gamugot pero mura ko gamugot. Do you get the point? Let's put it into a common or a mainstream term, a resting bitch face. I have that. Nga maski pag wa ko'y gibuhat, magtanaw lang ganay ko out of the wilderness, no? I just look straight. Mura na ko gamugot. And that's a given. So the meaning that the people will now create is that, oy, bad mood, or oy, stricto, oy, hilas, oy, dili approachable. So karon ang gibuhat ato nga politician is that every time he would go out or every time there will be pictures of him posted, he or she would smile. Dako kay ngisi. Because although it is not normal nga magngisi ka every time, lain pod maglingkod lang ka, magtan-aw lang kag cellphone mo, magngisi ka, nya walay katawanan, that's something different, no? So every time that he would go out in public, makigdiskurso siya sa mga tao, na yung mga picture, mga ads about that politician nga ipagawas, he would smile. Kani it's a different take when you see the president or President Duterte smile. Kaya you always see him as a strong man. That's a given. Iyan na yun ng identity, a strong man. Kaya you cannot cross him, kaya hinagid siya baruganan. Napod siya firm grip on the knowledge of that particular issue. Labi na karon nga presidente siya, so mura siya gamugot perni. But if you see him smile or smirk, it feels so refreshing. If you ask me, it feels so refreshing because you don't always see the guy do it. It's also the same with people. So if you are looking at a particular individual, unya, wa ka ganay siyang dagway, kahit number one, maot yung siyag na, unya, mugot pagid kayo, well, you will always create the meaning, ay, stricto siya, ay, uy, attitude. But if you try to communicate with a person and you see, ay, this person is very down to earth, very approachable, always likes to laugh and, joke around, gaan ka istorya, ay, mausab imuhang meaning, mausab imong perception. So the role of the receiver is also very important because we have the responsibility to always look at things in an objective lens. Or we always need to comprehend messages in an objective and sensitive lens. Kaya waka kahibaw ba nga kagahapon perte ninyong iroanay sa imuhang friend, perte ninyong katawa-katawa. Karon kay bad mood imong friend, nabanghagan kaniya, nalain na noon kaniya, na friendship over, inana ka OA. Waka kay bawo nga nada siya giagian niya, dili niya makayag control iyang reaction niya. Sige mo siya iroon, di nasikhan noon ka. So you need to also, the receiver also needs to have the responsibility to try to be sensitive and be cautious in approaching people, labi na when they are giving you the message, because you do not know the intent of the message. For example, sir, madelay ang imong delivery. Madelay ang imong expected nga maayuhon. Kay mao'y ingon sa head, mao'y ingon sa sender. So ikaw po, as the receiver, initial reaction is to get mad or to get upset and to show the frustration to the bearer of that quote-unquote bad news. So the responsibility now falls on your hand. Nga dili ka mo react. Instead, you are just going to respond in a positive, in a progressive, productive manner. Okay po, ma'am, let me know what are the specifics of the matter, nganong na-delay, nganong dili maabot, unsay ingon dito sa sender, or when can I expect it to arrive at the very most. Okay, kung magsige pa kagbalik nganong sa hinungdan, you will also be stressed and mas ma-frustrate. But if you're now going to focus on the when it is going to be made available, then I think that is a more productive response. Kaysa naman namanghag ka, nga naman, nga, dugay naman kayo na. It doesn't give you any positive or productive resolve or resolution out of the manner or the matter at hand. So instead, you try to be productive and you try to understand the scenario. Because ultimately, the receiver will always be the last, or the receiver will be the person who has the bad mouth or who will be in the bad mouth of people. Ay, namanghag siya pag ingon ako nga bagsak siya. Ay, namanghag siya pag ingon ako nga 78 lang iyang grado. So you have to be gentle, or kung di good gentle kay bundak ang information, then you need to have the responsibility to be sensitive, nga dili ka magkalit og wild. A very good example of this is, we're still talking about the receiver creating meaning, out of the encoded message of the sender. A very good example of this, class, is the documented reaction of George W. Bush when he found out that in 2004, 9/11 happened. The Twin Towers. I think mo pa'y pag-anak sa inyo anak. Pero if you go back, since it is available on the internet or on Google, a lot of documentaries have been made. Kay lagi, there were people who died tragically, and it was a terrorist attack. So it was alarming for the whole world because it could spark another war that the world cannot afford. Nya ang kalaban pa yun is America. So, you know, a lot of conspiracies happen. But if you go back to that video, to that documentary, I think it's on HBO, 9/11 documentary. You can watch it online. If you're on streaming services, I think it's also in Netflix. Try to pause from watching K-drama and try to look into these documentaries that will let you see how communication process unravels, because it is very much evident in these documentaries. Katong nga documentary class, I was amazed. The scenario was 9/11 happened, a terrorist attack happened in America. The president back then, George W. Bush, basig wapon mo kailakin sa president, naglisod bagita gumburza, basig maglisod pod mo ana ha, president sa United States during that time. Basig ay ko ingnaw mo kailas president sa US karon or sa Russia karon. Please lang. Anyway, going back, George W. Bush, or the president at that time, was attending an activity in a preschool in a particular state or county. So, nasa eskwelahan sa mga bata, gagmayng bata. It was mixed. Na black Americans, na po white mixed ba? Mixed. Kay elementary school lagi. So, the president was there for a reading activity, one of his social duties. Karon, the Secret Services told the president that a plane hit one of the twin tower, not really twin towers, because that's in Malaysia, no? But hit the I forgot the exact name of that tower, pero duha na kabuok tower, World Trade Center ayun. A plane hit one of the buildings or the towers at the World Trade Center. So, you know, people were gathering information as to what happened. Was this an accident or whatever? You can see in that particular clip that George W. Bush had a reaction when the Secret Service told him that America was under attack that is so composed, yet you can see that there is a change in his understanding. There is a change in his behavior, that he needs not to panic, but instead he needs to be critical in giving the next orders, given nga he is the President of the United States and he was in the audience of daycare pupils. So kung mag-rattle siya dito, marattle siya, magpanic siya dito, what will happen to the kids? Matrauma ang mga bata. The president, narattle niya, guest of honor, you know, the president, taas kay tanaw, niya marattle ulit. Niya, Secret Service will, you know, so that will be something catastrophic if you ask me. So what happened was, George W. Bush tried to stay composed, tried to stay calm. And then, when the Secret Service told him, America is under attack, okay, the Secret Service does not need to give all the glory details, but instead needs to present the salient points of the, you know, of the message or the information. So the Secret Service told him, America is under attack. Instead of panicking or rattling at a pace ba nga he needs to go elsewhere, he just lets the activity finish, not to startle the children, not to startle the school personnel that the nation was under attack. But the media that was covering the event or the activity where the president was already knew what was starting to unravel, nga there was a terrorist attack. But George W. Bush's reaction was really admirable. Kaya he just stayed calm. Pero makita ni mo siyang now, he was thinking of something else, far greater than just simply reading a children's book. So that's creating meaning out of the message encoded, sent by the sender. So by the Secret Service telling him nga, sir, America is under attack, ug ako'y president, of course, any one of us would have panicked given the situations that America was in during that time. They just recently killed, you know, a lot of Islam leaders, Muammar Gaddafi, so on and so forth. Dagan kasi lagi pamatay ato ang America. America led, you know, invasions of what we now know as UN convention, so many. So karon, he just stayed calm. And then after that, then there was the addressing of the issue. America went on lockdown after 9/11, after the attack on the World Trade Center. America went on lockdown, but they never, or the president never acted on a manner nga nagpanic siya or narattle siya. Okay, if the president will panic or the president will be rattled, now what will happen to the subordinates? What will happen to the citizens? Out of that example, I bear in mind what should be the qualities of the president of our country, the Philippines, should have or should possess. Kung sa mga butang nga mga issues nga dugay nang ginatuki sa to ang nasod, magpanic siya or ang iyang response is not really constructive, ultimately that particular candidate will not become a good president. But if the president is, forward looking, wa niya ginadwell ang mga issues nga wala man po'y kahimuan sa tibuok nasod, personal lang nga atake sa iyaha or whatever, but he focuses instead on the possible solutions that could be made to existing crisis of the country, I believe that is a much more worthy candidate to listen to. The platforms, the programs. Nga naman, kaya kung i-base lang nimo sa plataforma nga giplano niya, plano ra na niya. Sabto na to nga there are Republic Acts na ay mga balaod put in place to enact the program, to enact the platform of that particular president. Now, if it is not in line with what is stated in the Constitution, what are the laws that are provided, in that particular program, ultimately, kung ano ginayaha, storya, kwentong barbero. Bakak-bakak lang ba? I will create this kind of department. I will make sure that this will, tanang tao na balay, na kaugaling balay. Unya na naman tayo housing and human settlement nga department. Why not utilize that? What are your plans for that? So kung dili nimo na masabtan, well, the communication process is either established poorly, established with greed, or is not really effective at all. So we need to think about that. We need to think and to identify basic elements of communication process in order for us to become now critical thinkers. Kaya kung sige lang ta react without comprehending, without understanding the context, basta kay may matubag lang jud ka nga fact check kay naay sources given, it does not really follow. I don't really completely see the point of it. You need to also understand the context and make your own decision out of it. I don't like clout chasers. Mainit akong ulo ana kana sa social media. Okay, that's the meaning that they create of a poorly established communication process to begin with. Right? So that is something that we need to take a look at intently kaya para makasabot jud ka what you are sending, what you are receiving, and what is the message at hand. How to present the information or the idea, and how to decode it. How to, best create meaning out of it. Right? Another element of communication process is decoding. Decoding, class, is the process of giving meaning to the message. Kung kaganiha, ang receiver is the one to create the meaning, the actual giving of the meaning is called decoding. Receiver is a person, the second two-way process man siya. So the second part, essential part of that process, the actual giving of the meaning now to that message is what we call decoding. That's now the process of giving meaning to the message. Muna madunggan ninyo, balik-balik ko na ko and say, how are we able to decode it? How are we able to, that's actually the process of giving meaning to the message or to the information that is being sent to you. Now, there are ways on how the humans can decode a message, and that could be prior knowledge, ato ang kaalam-daan, biases. What are your stances or principles that is in contradiction with the message that comes across? Belief system, norms, values, culture. So these are few of the ways that humans decode a particular message. Prior knowledge, biases, belief system, norms, values, and culture. Now, feedback. This is something very important in relation to what I say, giving a reaction and giving a response. Feedback now is the response of the receiver to the sender or the source. This can be a gesture or a clarificatory question. Example, nakoy gihatag nga task. What do you commonly use as a feedback? I-heart ninyo ang message. Diba? That is very common. When we give chats or announcements in Messenger, i-heart ang message or i-like ang message. Pag na clarification, you send a message or you send a question. Sir, tama akong nasabtan, ngayon ani, ngayon ana. Walay mali ko mangutana class, that is a given. But if dili ka mangutana, unya mali ang imong gibuhat or ang imong pag-comply sa maong nga information or ang pagdawat sa maong nga information, that is wrong in the first place. Wa ka kasabot di ay fully sa istorya. Karon imong gipanabi ang istorya. What are you now? A peddler of fake news. Di man fake news, pero a peddler of incomplete information, which is wrong. So feedback now is your response to the sender, which again, as I've said already, entails a huge responsibility for us to perform. And then noise is the interruption within the communication process. Meaning to say, mo ni ang makadisrupt, makaguba sa process of communication. This could be internal or external, whether wa ka kasabot sa message or tungod ani nga mga factors nagkausab-usab, nagkatibulaag ang imuhang or ang message nga gina-convey sa imuha. So that is noise. Internal noises includes but are not limited to headache, physiological issues, or anxiety. While external noise could include loud noise, literal, loud noise outside, emergency, loss of internet connection, hinay nga internet connection, brownout, so on and so forth. So those are common types of internal and external noise. Now, with the discussion made, let's try to wrap up the salient points of this lesson. First, the communication process is the system of transferring information or ideas from a sender to a receiver. The source or sender is the origin of the message. It is shaped by the source to convey the intended meaning to the receiver through encoding. Now, decoding is the process of creating meaning and interpreting. This is done by the receiver of the message. Feedback is the response of the receiver based on the interpretation of the message. And miscommunication or misinterpretation may occur if there is noise during the communication process. So, with that in mind, how do pictures, symbols, and gestures enhance the effectiveness of communication? We always talk about the advent of technology, given that it's already nearing or already in its peak. How does pictures, symbols, and gestures enhance the effectiveness of the communication process? Try to ponder about that, and if there are questions that may arise, make sure that you are going to jot it down as well as the salient points of this discussion so that we can discuss them during our online feedbacking. That's all.